So, Mr. Kupchan, thank you very much indeed for sharing your time with me today.
Pleased to be with you.
Mr. Kupchan, I want to start this conversation with a NATO ministerial meeting with the participation of the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that took place in Brussels. In addition to Ukraine and the Middle East, the Western Balkans was also in focus. From your point of view, what is the danger that NATO is concerned about the Western Balkans security-wise?
Well, I think in many respects the Western Balkans slipped off the radar screen during the post-9/11 era and then initially during the war in Ukraine. And all of a sudden people are worried that the region is potentially going to slip backward, perhaps even to conflict. We've seen tensions rising between Kosovo and Serbia, violence break out in northern Kosovo. Milorad Dodik in Republika Srpska is talking about secession and being the first president of an independent Republika Srpska. And so all of a sudden, I think NATO is concerned that the region needs attention. And we've seen a decision taken this week in Brussels to increase NATO's presence inside Kosovo, I think not because they're expecting violence, but as a way of deterring violence.
Mr. Kupchan, all the warnings for maintaining security and the peace came at the time of unrest in Kosovo, as you said, and the possibility of destabilization of Bosnia as well. Is there a concern that Russia may be able or capable to spread a new conflict in the Western Balkans, as President Zelensky of Ukraine was warning a couple of days ago?
Well, there's no question that the Russians never miss an opportunity to try to capitalize on internal divisions within the Western Balkans to stir up trouble and increase their influence. We saw the Russians try to block Montenegro's accession to NATO. We saw the Russians try to mess around in the name change between North Macedonia and Greece, resolving that issue. We see the Russians trying to increase their influence in Serbia, where they have an intelligence presence. I do think the bigger picture here is one in which Russia's invasion of Ukraine is damaging Russia's reputation in the region, will make countries like Serbia think twice before looking to Russia for help. So I think the big picture here is one in which Russia is gradually losing its footholds in the region, but no question that they will take opportunities to stir up trouble, whether it's in Bosnia and Herzegovina or between Kosovo and Serbia.
So Russians are trying, through their proxy, let me say, Serbia, to interfere in the Balkans?
Yes, I mean, right now, I think Russia is in spoiler mode. Putin sees himself as someone whose main mission is to unravel the post-Cold War settlement, to stir up trouble in the Caucasus, in Ukraine, in the Western Balkans. And I think one of the reasons that NATO is stepping up is to counter increased Russian efforts and to perhaps use this as an opportunity, the reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to finally get the region over the hump, to resolve the long-standing dispute between Kosovo and Serbia, and ultimately anchor the entire region in Atlantic institutions.
Have we saw the fingers, let me call it like that, of Russia in the latest developments in the northern part of Kosovo, in Banjska on the 24th of September?
I don't know exactly the degree to which Russia is pulling strings as the puppet master. This may have been more of a homegrown operation, but there's no question that the Russians welcome this kind of turmoil, that they capitalize on this kind of turmoil, but I wouldn't go so far as to point to a deliberate Russian role in the violence.
Clear, but as we are to this matter, to this question of Banjska on 24th of September, why didn't the European and the American diplomatic efforts earlier this year resulted successfully in preventing such things to happen?
Well, I think that the US and the EU have been redoubling their efforts to engage in the region, and they're doing it together, unlike during the Trump era when the US was really working alone. Now we see the Biden administration engaging in very significant teamwork with the EU in the region. And I do think that there is on the table from the EU a pathway to normalization. Unfortunately, we seem to be stuck right now. I think that the leadership in Pristina, Mr. Kurti, has at times taken steps that are not helpful, pushing the issue of identity cards and license plates, seating mayors in the north, despite the fact that they were elected by a tiny minority of the population. I think we need to get back to a productive dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade, because I do believe that the roadmap that has been laid out by the EU has real potential to lead to normalization between Pristina and Belgrade.
I'll stay still on the security matters, and especially when it comes to the events that happened in September this year. And there have been also reports of the gathering of the Serbian army around or on the border with Kosovo. Are the intrusions inside the territory of Kosovo a sign that the situation is not going towards the normalization?
Well, I think right now we can say that the situation is not moving forward. And in fact, we've seen backsliding. The violence in Bansk, the mobilization or reported mobilization of Serbian troops, the tensions that continue to exist in northern Kosovo, these are signs that right now the nationalist rhetoric, the nationalist passions are overwhelming the importance of getting back on the track of normalization. But I do think that, especially because NATO has its hands full in Ukraine, the US and Europe have their hands full in the Middle East, the last thing that they want is an outbreak of sustained violence in the Western Balkans. That's why I think you're seeing such intense engagement, and why NATO has taken, in my mind, the right decision to increase its presence in Kosovo as a way of warding off the potential outbreak of more violence.
But NATO was saying that they want some, or they are thinking of putting in Kosovo and in the region a permanent, let me say, mission of their troops. When it comes to Kosovo, can this be a solution for security, always considering the geopolitical situation today?
Well, by permanent, I think what NATO means is more than a temporary rotation. I don't think what you're talking about here is a permanent NATO presence, if that means something that's going to last decades. And that's because I ultimately remain an optimist that there will be a settlement between Pristina and Belgrade. There will be normalization. And that's because the region is close to Europe. It is, many of it, the former states of Yugoslavia are anchored in NATO and in the European Union. For me, it's a question of when and not if Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, Serbia are anchored in the EU and NATO. This is an opportunity. This moment really, I think, should be seized by both Kosovo and Serbia to get over the tough decisions, to make the tough compromises that will anchor the region in Europe.
But are both sides, Kosovo and Serbia, in this case, Prime Minister Kurti and the President Vučić, trying to postpone the implementation of what they have agreed in Brussels and in Ohrid this year?
No question that both sides have been dragging their feet, and that I think both President Vučić and Mr. Kurti have missed opportunities to act on the formation of the Association of Serb Municipalities and to fulfill other commitments that have been laid out in the EU plan. The problem here is that nationalism plays well in domestic politics, and I think to some extent both Kurti and Vučić have played the nationalist card in a way that has not been helpful, has not advanced the peace process, one should perhaps hope that the outbreak of violence in the north, that the mobilization of Serbian troops drives home to Kosovars and Serbians alike that it's time to move in the direction of peace, of normalization once and for all.
As far as I understand, President Vučić and Prime Minister Kurti are more, let me say, willing to face each other outside the negotiation table.
Well, I think we have seen repeated efforts to put the two at the table. We've also seen repeated efforts with Prime Minister Kurti individually and President Vučić individually. I think what you need here is all hands on deck. Try all different kinds of venues. You get the Americans to put pressure on both sides, get the EU to make clear that Serbia has no path to EU membership without normalizing relations with Kosovo. There is a real opportunity here. It must be seized.
Mr. Kupchan, when the European plan was mentioned or put on the table, on one occasion you said, and then I'm quoting you, "This is the best chance that exists to implement the roadmap that will lead to normalization and recognition of Kosovo by Serbia." Do you still believe that this could be the outcome, the recognition of Kosovo by Serbia?
I think that has to be the outcome. Nothing short of Serbia's recognition of Kosovo will suffice, and I think the European Union has made that clear. Does that mean that that outcome must be attained at the beginning? No, probably not. And I think what the EU has in mind here is a sequence of steps, the ultimate outcome of which is full recognition of Kosovo by Serbia as an independent and sovereign state. I'm confident that we will get there, and I think that now is the time to really begin to get in the car and head down that road. The last year or so has provided both rays of light and serious moments of darkness. I think the fact that NATO discussed the Western Balkans at the top of its agenda in Brussels this week should give the region a certain amount of momentum to get on with making tough compromises and tough decisions.
When you are mentioning compromises and the tough decision, but both leaders are somehow reluctant in compromising. One on one side in creating the association, on the other side, the other one not recognizing de facto Kosovo. So how to balance these two very distant approaches between two of them?
Well, the reluctance of both sides to jump into the deep end of the pool, if you will, is understandable. And that's because in Kosovo, in part because of history and in part because of concern about sovereignty and how an association of Serb municipalities would be balanced with the authority of the central government in Pristina, how the relationship between ethnic Albanians and ethnic Serbs would evolve. These are all real pressing questions. They need to be engaged. And on the other side, in Belgrade, in Serbia, there is a lot of historical baggage there. It's difficult for Serbs to come to terms with the fact that Kosovo is on the path to full sovereignty and independence. So it takes time for leaders to move their populations in the right direction. But as I have said previously, I think this is the best chance the two parties have ever seen. And I think that it would be a tragic mistake for them not to seize the moment.
Are they having still time to seize this moment?
They do have time. And I think in some ways what NATO has decided to do is to buy more time by putting a larger NATO presence, by making clear that NATO is determined to get Kosovo and Serbia across the finish line, determined to make sure that Republika Srpska doesn't secede from Bosnia-Herzegovina and plunge that part of the Balkans back into its dark history. So yes, there is time, but there is also urgency. And that's why I think we need to get away from the violence, the tension, the provocative moves that both sides have taken over the last year or so to get back and pursue forward momentum.
As we have been speaking about the association, I will quote you once again. The parties must be at the table and create the plan, a form of autonomy without threatening the integrity and sovereignty of Kosovo state institutions. But exactly the word autonomy is the sensitive issue for Kosovars and for Kosovo leadership. So how do you think that Kosovars would accept this, let me say, wording?
Well, you know, autonomy takes very different forms. If you look around the world, whether it's in Canada, where you have Quebecois, in Spain, Catalans and Basques, in Belgium, Flemish, French speakers, in Malaysia, different ethnic minorities. There are lots of different formulas that have succeeded in bringing stability to countries that are multi-ethnic. What formula the situation in Kosovo is conducive to, what brand of autonomy or self-governance, what level of self-governance emerges, that's really the devil in the details. That is up to the leadership in Belgrade and Kosovo to figure out. But we know from history, we know from looking around the world that these kinds of compromises work. It's now over to the diplomats to sit down at the table and do the hard work to find a formula that both Kosovo and Serbia can live with.
As you are mentioning diplomats to sit down around the table, let me ask you, what should the EU and the US do now in this situation to push forward the solution between Kosovo and Serbia?
You know, I think the carrots and sticks analogy is the best one, and that the US and the EU need to hold out the positive, prosperous, secure future that comes with making tough decisions and normalizing relations. And they also need to make clear that if those tough decisions and compromises aren't made, there will be costs. The EU and the US will keep their distance from Kosovo and Serbia. They may suspend various kinds of military and economic cooperation. And I think that one of the strongest sources of leverage that the EU has is to say, you want to join Europe, you want to anchor yourselves in Atlantic institutions and enjoy the security, the prosperity, the prosperous civil society that comes with that outcome, you have some hard decisions to make. That is a very powerful source of leverage. We've seen it exercised across Central and Eastern Europe to good effect.
It seems that you are very optimistic. Can you tell me where do you base your optimism that Kosovo and Serbia will finally find the last peace solution?
I'm optimistic, number one, because we've seen this experiment work in many other parts of Europe. Yes, the Western Balkans have lagged behind and have suffered more bloodshed and division than other parts of Europe after the end of communism and the fall of the Berlin Wall. But I'm confident that piece by piece, the Western Balkans are fitting into that broader puzzle. And it's also important to keep in mind that the Western Balkans are in a good neighborhood. They are surrounded by EU and NATO members. They are cheek by jowl with the anchor of Western society. I would be less optimistic about Central Asia, about the Caucasus, about areas of the world that aren't in the same good neighborhood. But geography and proximity still matter. And that's why, in the end of the day, I'm optimistic that Kosovo and Serbia will find their way to normalization and full integration into the Atlantic community.
Charles Kupchan, thank you very much indeed, sir, for being today with me at the program Click of Radio Television 21.
My pleasure to join with you. Enjoyed the conversation.